Welcome to the Get Published podcast, sponsored by Brodie Consulting Group. To get more information about our coaching, publishing, executive ghostwriting, and podcast production services, go to getpublishedpodcast.com. Hello, I am Paul Brodie, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Get Published podcast, where we help authors get published with a proven system that works. Today, we're being joined by Michael McDonald, author of Choose Your Own Misery, Dating. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Paul.
Are you ready to get started?
I'm ready.
All right. Question number 1. What is the one piece of advice that you would give to a first-time author who is currently writing their book?
Okay. It's a great question. I would say, generally speaking, just take it easy on yourself. Don't beat yourself up too much. Putting together a book is an insanely difficult task that can often take years of your life. From like planning out the book to writing the book to editing, revising the book, finding a good lit agent, and finding a good publisher, as well as marketing the book, it's all incredibly difficult and can be rather time consuming. Given that a first-time author has little to no experience doing any of these tasks, you got to cut yourself some slack. The publishing business is extremely competitive, and you're likely to face a lot of rejection and setbacks. So try your best not to pile on yourself with unfair criticisms. And, like if you want a chocolate fudge brownie sundae because your favorite publisher rejected your book, then go ahead and eat that chocolate fudge brownie sundae.
And what do you feel is the hardest part about getting published?
I think all the waiting can be difficult. I mean, generally speaking, publishing moves glacially slow. If I can remember correctly, it took me a few months to find a literary agent and then maybe 3 or 4 months to find a publisher for the first book. And then probably another year before the book actually came out. And I was told that, comparatively speaking, this is rather quick. So to that end, always be working on your next project and the project after that, and just do your best to remain patient.
Well, let's talk about marketing. So please share a marketing strategy that you have used in your book launch that has worked well.
Well, first and foremost, I'd say be sure to say yes to anything and everything. Do as many blog tours, radio appearances, podcasts, TV spots, whatever else. Never, ever pass up an opportunity for free press. And then in terms of like a marketing strategy, I'd say if you can work with publicists, do so. Sit down and look at all the places you want to be interviewed at or all the places where you want your book to be reviewed. Keep track on like a Google chart and contact each and every reviewer with a very specific email. Make sure to mention other books that they've reviewed and what you liked about those reviews. Don't just send out, a mass email or a press release to everyone all at once. Tell the reviewer or the interviewer why covering your book would be to benefit to, for their publication. You want to make sure that everything is as mutually beneficial as possible.
So you're talking about having different websites and magazines review your book. Is that correct?
Exactly. So if you want your book, reviewed at crack.com, let's say, make sure you know who you're going to send the email to, cite their previous, listicles or work that you've enjoyed, and then talk about why it'd be a good fit at crack.com.
Got it. And besides websites, have you also reached out to different print media, digital media? What are some of your strategies with that?
Yeah, definitely. I've worked in media for a number of years, so I've been on the other side of it where people are sort of pitching me ideas. And honestly, I think if you can like start a dialogue on Twitter, that can be really helpful. Again, a little flattery goes a long way. Talk about articles that you've enjoyed and maybe why covering your article would be to their benefit, like why it would match with their aesthetic. Maybe they like to cover, youth-centric products or sports or whatever. So there should be some sort of relative synergy with what it is that they write in your book. If somebody, is a foreign correspondent covering, French foreign policy and you've got a fiction book about dating, it's obviously not a match. Don't waste that person's time. Be very strategic about it all and make sure that you don't contact these people more than once. It can happen where you're just sending out emails all over the place. People generally don't appreciate being spammed by authors.
Well, one thing that I noticed, we had a gentleman on the show earlier this week, Jordan Paris, super nice guy. And he was talking about one of his strategies to get on podcasts in particular is actually to reach out to the guests, not only personalize it, but also take the time to listen to several episodes and leave a review. Because I think as a podcast host, the main thing, like an author, the main things we need really in terms of supporting us is reviews. So I think that's always a great way to not necessarily butter up someone, but just to help warm that conversation and to increase the likelihood that they're going to connect with you and potentially have you on the show. And I feel that there's similar strategies you can utilize in regards to some of the websites, some of the media going, hey, I love this, I love that, I listened to this part of it. And it just really shows the engagement and, more importantly, building that connection.
Of course, liking things on Twitter, liking people on things on people's Facebook pages, doing retweets, showing that you've already engaged with their content before goes a long way. I think, given the choice between one author that is engaged with the content than the other that hasn't, everything else being equal, they're going to offer the person that's already engaged with your content.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about your favorite book. So what is your favorite book, and what was the number one thing that you learned from it?
Okay, that's a really tricky question. I think by and large, there's a book called Death and the Penguin, which I think is my favorite book by a Ukrainian author, Andrei Kurkov. I'll give you a broad overview of the book if that's okay.
Sure.
It sort of follows like a young writer named Victor who lives in Kiev in post-Soviet Ukraine. And he's trying to write books, but he can't quite make it. So he moonlights as an obituary writer for a local newspaper. Now, unbeknownst to him, he's writing obituaries for people that are still alive, but soon after these obituaries are published, these people are murdered. So ostensibly, these obituaries are serving as like a hit list, basically. You find out later it's for a crime syndicate. Victor himself is this sort of single, lonely guy who bought a penguin once the zoo realizes that they can't afford to feed the animals anymore. So the penguin is his only companion, basically, throughout the book. And the penguin is relatively like unhappy and lost in Victor's apartment. The penguin almost kind of serves as a mirror into Victor's psyche. Now, I guess what I learned from that is that, there's a lot of sadness in Death and the Penguin, and every day for Victor is fraught with depression and a certain amount of like emotional heaviness. He's in this loveless relationship. He doesn't like his job. He's got very little food, almost no food to eat. He doesn't have any heat in his apartment. Now, I'm not sure how autobiographical the story is, but generally speaking, I think the author doesn't really hold back on hitting on some very unpleasant and dark themes. So I think, if you are experiencing these darker thoughts or whatever, to just sort of lean into them and write what you feel, no matter how disturbing or weird some of your thoughts may be. I'm sure other people will have those thoughts as well. And by expressing them, you'll probably feel less alone, and you'll make other people feel less alone as well.
And for our final question, what is your favorite quote and why?
Okay, so I will go back to this Death and the Penguin book that I just referenced. And this is a bit of a spoiler. But one day, Victor realizes that he has to write his own obituary, which basically means that the end is near for him. And there's a line from the chef, who's one of his friends, and he says, "Drink up, there's no escaping fate, drink while the champagne lasts." So there's this, like, I guess, libertine quality to the quotation, but also it sort of means that, everything that we have around us is rather ephemeral, and that the only constant is going to be change. So if you want to do something like publishing a book, make sure you do it, right now, because tomorrow is not, a given. I hate to end this interview sounding totally cliched, but basically all that we have is the present, so make the most out of it.
Absolutely. Don't ever ask the question, what if?
Indeed. Very true.
Agreed. Well, I want to thank you for being a guest on the show. What is the best way for people to find you online?
Sure. You can go to Twitter at TheOnald, TheOnald, or you can listen to my podcast, eplpod.com.
Well, Michael, I want to thank you once again for being on the show, and I wish you all the best in your author journey ahead.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me, Paul.
Thanks again for joining us today. To learn more about how you can be featured in our brand new Get Published business book, go to getpublishedpodcast.com.